Hey Deckers, Happy New Year, and we're kicking it off with a performance roundup. Today we're going to be looking at Monster Hunter Rise, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, Sunset Overdrive, Tales of Iron, Final Fantasy 7 Ever Crisis, and Last of Us Part 1. But first, if you are not running Cryo Utilities on your Steam Deck, then you really should be. If you don't know about Cryo Utilities, we have a full guide for that in the description below, but I'll also leave a link to their GitHub for you just to go and run the install if you want to. But this essentially cleans up your deck and makes it run much more efficiently, and you'll get better performance out of pretty much every single game. Onto the games then. Monster Hunter Rise hasn't really changed a lot since its original release. However, it definitely is running a little bit better, especially on the Steam Deck OLED. I'm showing the LCD footage here from a few months back. You can see that at medium graphic settings it was still running a pretty solid 60 frames per second, but with the OLED and even on the LCD now, you are able to actually increase this to the high settings. So you'll see here, this is the medium on the Steam Deck OLED, and if we dial it up to high, things just look a lot nicer. Still don't have 16:10 aspect ratio unfortunately, but overall it does look absolutely fantastic on the Steam Deck, and on the OLED you'll be pushing around 21-22 watts. With the high graphic settings it will push it up to around 26-27 watts on the LCD, but you can leave it at medium and play quite happily. You do get a few dips here and there on the high graphic settings, but it does look absolutely gorgeous, and if you are looking to play Monster Hunter Rise on the go, then it's a brilliant way to play. We'll certainly be looking at Monster Hunter World soon in an upcoming performance roundup. Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is still unsupported on the Steam Deck officially, but it is running, and it's running a lot better than it used to. However, you do still need to make a few tweaks. Now, whether you play a 90% rendering resolution or 100% is up to you on how many dips that you want to be able to stomach, but playing on the standard preset with shadows on low, AMD FSR off, and motion blur, chromatic and ambient occlusion all off as well, you are able to hold over 30 frames per second for the most part with the 60 frames per second cap. Unfortunately, even on the Steam Deck OLED, you're not going to be able to hold 60 frames per second without that FSR. But because it's FSR 1 integration, it really looks hideous, so I do not recommend it. But if you can handle the dips, and to be honest, it doesn't dip that much through standard gameplay, but when the fights do get hefty, it does go under the 30 frames per second mark under some of the special moves, but it is definitely more than playable. At 90% render resolution, it was a little bit blurry still, but it did perform a lot better. At the 100% render resolution, it does look really good, but as you can see here, in some of those hefty fights and special moves, it does dip into the mid to low 20s fairly regularly. But we are sitting around the 23 watt range on the Steam Deck OLED, so it's going to push around 26-27 watts on the LCD. Performance is around the same. It still has those dips, but can hold over that 30 if you want to stomach it. Onto Tales of Iron. Huge thanks to CI Games for giving us a key for this one to test it out, and you can pick this up in the description below. We've put a link in there directly if you want to pick this one up. Fantastic little roguelike side scroller with fantastic story and overview navigation as well. Parry works really well in this game. Get quite a nice parry window, so you can get used to that combat quite easily. Loads of weapons to choose from, although I did go with the sword and shield on this one, and the graphics are just absolutely superb. This is on the max settings. There isn't really a huge amount in the way of settings for this one, but as you can see, it's running at 120 frames per second solid because of the screen that I'm plugged into here for the HDMI pass-through, and it does still go up to around 16-17 watts on the Steam Deck OLED, and it will go up to around 20 on the Steam Deck LCD, but it will sit around the 10 to 14 mark quite a lot of the time. So you are going to get huge game time on this one if you're out and about on battery, and it also has fantastic reviews on Steam, so do go and check this one out. Sunset Overdrive is also unsupported on the Steam Deck, however it does work perfectly fine. There is a couple of errors on the startup, which is why it's probably going to remain unsupported, but don't worry about it. First off, you get a horrible error message when you start this up, and the Steam Deck controller support doesn't really work on this section, or even with the mouse shortcut, you actually have to tap the OK button, which can be a little bit fiddly, especially if you're on another screen. And you'll also get save files corruption warning when you start up, although any new save files have been perfectly fine for me, even with the cloud save uninstalling and reinstalling. I have one corrupted save which I don't actually ever remember having. I think it's just an issue with the game, but otherwise saves work fine. Graphics wise and performance wise though, you do need to put this to 720 to get the best performance out of it. It goes a bit weird on some of the other resolutions, but you can then leave it at 4 with SMAA on ×2 and have an absolute blast with the game. There's quite a lot of funky things to this game if you've never played Sunset Overdrive, and if you manage to pick this up in the sale or just look out for it, then let us know in the comments below. But it is extremely fun, awesome soundtrack to boot with it, and if you are looking to play other unsupported games, then we will feature these regularly in these videos from now on. And if you have been playing some games that are unsupported but work absolutely fine, then we've put a link to our form in the description below, so you can let us know so we can feature it for others in the future. Otherwise, you can see Sunset Overdrive performing at a decent 60 plus frames per second all of the time. Final Fantasy 7 Ever Crisis is free to play, and there's very mixed opinions on this one. It has a great mix of the old school Final Fantasy 7 running around, but when you go into battles, it goes into newer graphic style. However, it dupes you into decent combat in the early stages and then drops auto on you after around half an hour to an hour of gameplay, which means this becomes Final Fantasy 13 with purchases. Essentially, all you have to do is go into battle and just watch what happens, which is a little bit boring, but with the amount of battles you can see why they've implemented auto, and you will only want to take on the more challenging battles to manually do later. But this really isn't the type of game that I would want to be playing on my Steam Deck, to be honest. However, it may be something for you. On top of the auto combat, you have multiple additional downloads where it keeps saying that you need to download more content. So the couple of gig that it says originally is a lie. It's around 20 gig overall. It also doesn't have controller support out of the box and comes with the standard keyboard and mouse mapping, which is horrendous. So you need to go to the community mappings, and this top one here is absolutely fantastic. So make sure you give them a thumbs up. The Steam Deck with extra commands. This actually runs perfectly on the Steam Deck if you do want to play this game. The reason why I say it's absolutely horrendous is because it does ram microtransactions down your throat, and there is an absolute ton of them. As you would expect from a free-to-play gacha type game, this has tons of in-app purchases, rolls and draws for weapons and abilities, and lots of other stuff and equipment. It's not going to be a cheap game if you get drawn into that kind of series, but if you want to play for free, then you will be able to play through most of the storyline until you hit that paywall. Last up, we have The Last of Us Part 1. This has definitely got better over the months and is more than playable now. As you can see here, it's performing at a decent 30 plus frames per second. You could cap it at 30 if you wanted, but I do like to get the extra frames when available. So you can play Last of Us Part 1 very happily on the Steam Deck and Steam Deck OLED now. Now, I did run this with the auto graphics settings and aspect ratio, but I did put the FSR2 on quality mode, but with all of the other graphic settings, I left this on auto with motion blur off, and it ran exceptionally well. Now, it still has the annoying 10-minute or so load time for processing shaders on the first boot, but other than that, it is performing exceptionally well. So if you are looking to dive into The Last of Us Part 1 on the Steam Deck, then there's no better time. We'll be having our 2023 roundup very soon of all of the most played games on Steam Deck, but let us know in the comments below what you've been playing and what you'd like to see in these videos moving forwards. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.